Chapter 7, Illinois, 1991. JR and I were looking forward to being at home. Saul and I found an apartment in the suburbs, and I was blessed with a new job, even though I took a $4 cut in pay because anything was better than being without an income. However, we encountered a new problem: childcare. The fees were equivalent to the cost of a one-bedroom apartment. We had to figure out a plan to make this whole move work, so we agreed to send JR to live temporarily in Alabama. Paying for him to go to kindergarten a half day and then to daycare wasn't worth it. My soul was weary and I needed rest. I felt content to be left alone inside my own four walls of solitude. It didn't matter that we didn't have a phone for a while. My thoughts were serene for the first time. I thanked God for Amaris, who was very supportive. At first, I wasn't watching Saul's pattern or paying any attention. I started noticing that he wasn't content being at home. He was driving into the city every other day and on the weekends. I had stopped caring about what he was doing because I had suppressed my true feelings about whether he was cheating on me. I was trying to find my independence again in the workforce. Therefore, my marriage was not my main focal point. The truth was, I wasn't emotionally ready to deal with my marriage. What could I change? I couldn't face knowing what I didn't want to hear. I knew I was limiting myself sitting behind a switchboard, so I still struggled to gain more competitive job market skills. I knew I had the potential to do better than answering phones. Nevertheless, this kind of work always fell into my lap and kept food on my family's table. I wasn't content, so I continued to send out my resumes. I prayed and kept searching for a better job. Our finances were always in trouble if I didn't work because Saul was a bad money manager. He had a gambling addiction, and at times he would go straight to the casino on payday before coming home. He blew his money on a lot of booze and nonsense. The one good thing is he never quit his job while I was going through these transitions. Finally, I saw an ad in the paper for a receptionist/secretary position at a pharmaceutical company. I felt differently about this opportunity because it offered secretarial duties along with PC training. I went into deep prayer by fasting and praying as I kept the faith to believe in God for the outcome. During the interviewing process, I was informed that it would take a few weeks before they reached a decision. I was hoping for an answer sooner. In the meantime, I was still working at my current job. On one particular day, I transferred a call to the wrong extension, which happened to be the owner's son. He came running over to my desk and started yelling. I immediately got angry because I felt embarrassed and stupid, although his ignorance was not mine. I asked a coworker to relieve me and went to the washroom. As soon as I entered the washroom, I burst into tears and cried out to the Lord to rescue me. At this point, I made up my mind to quit, but I waited to finish the week out. I couldn't take any more negative outbursts or comments. I felt threatened that I couldn't make a mistake without severe consequences. Working in that type of environment was unhealthy and could have caused me to become bitter. It was only a paycheck to get me back on my feet. On my last day of work, I kept a smile on my face, and at the end of the day, I cleared my desk and never looked back. While waiting to hear back from the pharmaceutical company, I started getting a lot of hang-up calls at home. I didn't think much about it because it was during business hours. Then I got a call one evening, a guy asking to speak to Saul. I had never heard this person's voice before, so I asked who was calling. He wouldn't tell me his name. I politely gave Saul the phone. Saul didn't want to talk in front of me. He walked around and then went into another room. That's when I started getting suspicious. about him being secretive. I would act as though I wasn't paying any attention, asking, "Oh, who was that?" He would give me a name and change the subject or get quiet. I knew he wasn't telling the truth. One afternoon, I fell asleep and had a vision that I was exchanging words with the pharmaceutical company. I woke up feeling tired and started thinking about the reality of my life. Suddenly, the phone rang. It was the pharmaceutical company calling to offer me the position. I eagerly accepted the job and thanked Jesus for answering my prayer. Before I got off the phone, the recruiter mentioned that I would get another salary increase after 90 days. That's when I got excited. I started working in March of 1992 and couldn't believe that the other employees were genuinely kind, friendly, and professional. I could feel the high morale. I received compliments on how I dressed and my professionalism, which made a big difference in my attitude when I came to work. However, my marriage was falling apart day by day. I felt this piercing on the inside that I couldn't seem to shake from my heart. I received a call at the switchboard from a woman asking to speak to me. She said that she had a child by Saul and that he was afraid to tell me. She admitted that she had been calling my house and hanging up because she knew that I didn't know anything about the situation. I tried to hold my composure together, feeling the heat rising like a thermostat in my face. I was speechless from being in shock, but finally I asked her, how long was their affair going on, and what proof did she have that Saul was the father? She said the baby had a country accent. I could tell from her reply that she was trash, and I told her it wasn't proof. The calls were coming in. My emotions were going crazy, so I hung up on her. I immediately called home to confront Saul about the matter. I could tell that he was expecting my call by his voice's tone and pretending to sound surprised to hear my voice. I gave him the news about my conversation with Miss Doe. He replied with a laugh. I said some mean, nasty, and hateful things and told him that we have trouble if it was true. I realized that I was falling apart and that it was time to leave work. As soon as I got home, I demanded that Saul talk to me. He knew I was furious and that I needed to know what the hell was going on. I could tell that he had been getting high and drinking. I was extremely hurt, and here he dared to get high. I demanded that he give me this woman's number and tell me that it wasn't true. He gave me her number to talk to her because he wouldn't discuss the matter. When I called her, we went back and forth over the phone, and I was only getting her version of the story. Again, I felt like I was getting nowhere, so I got off the phone. It was useless. This was not my mess, but somehow I realized that it was mine too, because we were married. I became enraged. Heat started circulating to the top of my head, and by this time I couldn't talk anymore. I was moving around like an uncontrollable maniac. I poured a glass of Jack Daniels straight and grabbed the Tylenol and tetracycline bottles from the bathroom cabinet. Then I ran into the bathroom, threw all the pills down my throat, and washed them down with 8 ounces of liquor. Saul tried to stop me, but it was too late. I slipped into a moment of insanity because I couldn't make sense of anything. My emotions and thoughts were confused. I needed to escape because I couldn't calm down. My world came crashing down instantly. It felt like explosions were going off inside my head. I couldn't be still. I had enough strength to kill somebody. That's how angry I was. Trust me, I know what it feels like to be lost within that moment of insanity. While my volcano was erupting, Saul was sitting at the dinner table, acting nonchalant. He said that he couldn't run anymore from this woman. Time was running out with his lies because she had reported him to public aid. The state sent papers to his job to garnish his check for child support. I believe that's when he knew she wasn't going anywhere. He said he had given her money to have an abortion. It was obvious. that he had been dodging and running from this woman for years because I remembered the phone call from a woman demanding that he come get his baby. I didn't completely believe that this woman had been behind every hang-up call, but it certainly revealed that she had her motive. Saul confessed that he was giving her money for the child. I found out that he had given her my baby's red hotshot car, a sentimental gift from my mother. I had realized it was missing after we moved. When I asked him about the car, he said that he had given it away to a cousin when I was in California. He was a master at lying, and of course I loved him and couldn't see through his lying spirit, or maybe I truly didn't want to. This woman said that she had tried on several occasions to convince him to tell me about the affair because it was driving him crazy. He was afraid I might leave him, and he didn't love her, so he was caught. I was exhausted at this point and decided to stop talking. I couldn't handle any more news in one day. Saul suggested that we lie down and take a nap. I tried to fall asleep, but my mind was too confused. I had never felt so much anger at one time in my entire life. I couldn't calm down, even though liquor usually makes me sleepy. I remember getting up to read one of my daily word books to find some comfort of hope. Inside, I found an 800 number for prayer, 24 hours a day. I decided to call the number since the call was free. I talked to a live person, a mild-mannered woman who sounded like she was reading from a script because her demeanor was too pleasant. My thoughts were too scattered to hold a conversation, and my mind fell into this dark place of despair. I told her that I was full of anger and asked her to help me. She prayed for me. Then I hung up the phone and called Amaris. Amaris knew that I was hiding something. My voice was slow and my speech was slurring. She started to fish for answers, and I told her that I had taken some pills. She screamed and told me to put Saul on the phone. I woke him up and gave him the phone. Next, he immediately took me to the 24-hour emergency center. I had my stomach pumped and was taken to the hospital in the ambulance. I stayed in intensive care for a day. I wasn't afraid of what I had done. I wanted to die. My heart was heavy, like a ton of bricks had fallen on me. All I could think about was the betrayal and the embarrassment I had to face. I felt horrible and trapped inside. Saul called my job to report my absence and tell them I was in the hospital. The job asked if they could send flowers, but he said no, because he was too embarrassed that they might find out why I was there. One of my cousins-in-law called to speak to me, and Saul informed her that I was in the hospital. She came to visit me because she sensed that something was wrong from the last time we spoke. I felt ashamed and embarrassed. I didn't want anybody to see me in that situation or state of mind, with tubes stuck down my nose and throat. Saul could have spared me the embarrassment, but he didn't. This cousin wanted to know what had happened, but I wouldn't disclose the truth to her. I wasn't ready to accept the truth at that time, and I didn't want her spreading rumors in case it wasn't his child. I had enough stuff to deal with during this tumultuous time. The doctor informed me that if I hadn't made it to the hospital by the time I did, I would have died within another hour due to liver failure. I had to attend a group to discuss my hurt. I spoke with the psychiatrist about why I attempted suicide. I was afraid of facing my fears and didn't think I could freely live my life without feeling ashamed and humiliated. He recommended that I go to college to attain some degree that would make me eligible for a profession. On my way home from the hospital, I felt disconnected from the world. I was having an experience from being locked up physically against my will, which caused me to think differently in terms of being out of touch with reality. The outside world seemed foreign for a minute. I believe because my spirit was grieved. The flowers that my job sent to my home were beautiful, but I couldn't appreciate them because I had no joy inside. I wore a mask back to work. It felt like a piece of my soul was missing. I was empty. Saul and I began to discuss his affair and his alleged child. I was very sensitive about the subject, but I had to face it to know the truth. The truth can reveal things that can either hurt you or release you, and I wanted my soul to be set free of this agony. Baby Doe's mother continued to complain about the child needing this and that. She expected Saul to buy whatever she asked. She started throwing her weight around because she felt there were no more secrets, and she wanted to punish him for having to raise the child alone. That's why she had pushed the issue to have him served with court papers. Once the state got involved, Saul was subpoenaed to establish paternity. He ignored the court, but I told him that he had better deal with the issue. I told him that I was leaving him because this was mentally and emotionally tearing me apart if it was his child. Saul was served with another set of court papers to respond to the allegations. Otherwise, he would be automatically determined as the father. Finally, he stepped up to the plate to comply. I thought the matter was going to be resolved right away, but that wasn't the case. Miss Doe was hoping that Saul and the baby would bond by building a relationship, so she offered him visitation. I told him that he'd better be certain that this was his child before he started doing anything like that. He expressed some doubt about being the father because the day he had driven to her place to give her the abortion money, she had gotten into another man's car, then pulled off laughing, and obviously she hadn't gotten the abortion. My thoughts about the matter were that she believed he had something to offer her besides child support, or maybe she wanted to trap him so she could get something later on. I got my phone number changed and told him to deal with the court. I didn't have the strength to make any decisions about whether I should stay or leave. I had recently gone through so much that by this time I was fragile. As time went on, I tried to resume my life, but my trust in my husband was shattered. I fell into depression for a few months and cried every day when I came home from work. I would go inside my bedroom and feel sorry for myself because the pain was piercing. I saw gray clouds for days because I couldn't appreciate the sun. Eventually, the tears stopped falling. I started walking with my head up as I trained myself to stop loving Saul. I was able to stop the flow of loving him deeply, even though I stayed because I didn't believe that I could make it on my own. Our relationship went in a different direction. We started having family dinners and throwing parties. I got involved in smoking pot and drinking my share of liquor too. I went along with this lifestyle because I had no more dreams and hopes about anything. During my adolescent years growing up with my parents, I saw what liquor and drugs had done to their lives. I didn't want to end up like that, looking bad and run down from the streets. It was the boundary I placed within my mind. We enjoyed our fun within our social circle. We would get high, eat, and drink together, but the misery was still there when the party was over. I decided to start exercising after being insulted by a neighbor who thought I was pregnant with twins. The alcohol started putting weight on me, so I knew I had better get a grip on things. I had an unforgettable experience one day while smoking marijuana. I started choking on my smoke, and my heart started racing. I couldn't catch my breath. Then I called on the name of Jesus, and eventually my lungs got clear. I calmed down, and my mind fell into a trance. After I came to my senses, I decided to stop smoking. I didn't want to die like that and meet God in that way. I needed to stop pleasing Saul. He enjoyed me getting high and being freaky with him. I would complain and express that this was putting pressure on me and that it wasn't of God. I couldn't conform any more to what he wanted. JR was back home with us after finishing kindergarten in Alabama. Saul's niece came to babysit for the summer while we worked. Our plan was working out with having our son home. By the time we sent his niece back to Alabama, JR would be ready to start first grade. Having JR in school all day was a huge relief financially to us. Around this time, we went visiting over to Saul's brother's house in Argyle Gardens. One of their neighbors came over while we were visiting. Saul grabbed her by the hand and their eyes met. He stared at her body, which caused everybody to stop talking. I couldn't believe my eyes. Then I asked him, what was that all about? And he said that he was trying to hook her up with his nephew. I told him that he was disrespecting me and that his nephew was a grown man who could find his own woman. He started talking loudly and being nasty. I told him that I was ready to leave, and then I told JR and his niece to get in the car. Saul's driving was reckless because he was high and drunk. We had an hour and 15-minute drive home. His niece started screaming for me to drive, but I wouldn't take the wheel. Next, Saul pulled over off the expressway to vomit. I made everyone suffer because of my anger. We made it home in one piece. Saul parked the car and I started talking about the incident, but he ignored me. I guess he didn't want our neighbors to hear me go off. Once we got inside the house, I went into the kitchen to get a long butcher knife. I started waving it at him and aimed it at his chest. He had this grin on his face like he wasn't feeling me. As I got closer, his niece screamed, "Run, Saul!" He ran out the door, down the stairs, and stayed with the neighbors for the rest of the night. The next day, he packed his clothes because he was thinking about moving to Texas to live with his brother. I felt miserable, but somehow I think he used the leaving tactic to reverse the psychology. We both lived dysfunctional lives. He had a sickness that I couldn't see, and I was an abused woman. Eventually, I lost weight and things were still going well at work. Then I got the news that I was pregnant. I wasn't happy about that because it got in the way of my hope of leaving Saul. Would I ever be able to break free from this unhealthy marriage? I couldn't see how, not with 2 babies. I felt like a spider trapped inside a web. It was the summer of 1993 when I got a phone call that my mother was in the hospital in San Francisco. She had left Michigan to visit her sister who lived in the Bay Area. I heard that some guys had jumped her outside the bus terminal and robbed her. She seriously was hurt, according to the doctor. Still, the most challenging part was discovering that she had a terminal illness. My heart was heavy. Although she acted rough and tough, as if she could handle any situation on her own, this time I believed that she was seriously hurt. She was diagnosed with cancer. The doctor decided to give her chemo treatments because her cancer was in its advanced stage. The final prognosis about her health was that she had only a year to live. My family in Sacramento wanted to reach out, but I did not respond. Instead, I contacted my Aunt Honey, who lived in Michigan. She and my mother had fought for many years, but she ended up being the one who was there to do the administrative part of getting her flown back to Michigan. I planned 3 trips to Michigan over time and had phone conversations in between my visits with my mother. Her conversations were shorter each time because she was growing weaker. I could tell that she wasn't used to being humble, but I saw it happening for the first time in my life. It's a true statement, but not often recognized, that an illness can make you humble. Her health was deteriorating. Day by day, she was regressing to infancy. I felt sad when she lost all her hair because she was such a hair person. She cared a lot about her appearance, but she was robbed of her beauty and health after living a hard life. Meanwhile, I was trying to hold onto my sanity through my hellish marriage. I had remorseful feelings about being pregnant. I did have some good days, but the majority of them were sad. Saul was putting me through all kinds of hell, staying out late and coming home at disrespectful times. He was working the evening shift and getting off at midnight, and he'd tell me that he didn't see a reason to come straight home after work since I was asleep. Things were beyond resolution, so I addressed what I could and suppressed what I couldn't. On January the 23rd, 1994, I gave birth to our second son. I went through the postpartum blues, wondering why I couldn't have just died. I resented my baby, and I hated my marriage, but there was still something inside that gave me hope to believe that my life was going to change. I couldn't see how or when, but I had enough faith to keep praying. I tossed and turned in agony, but I found that prayer was my greatest hope. The Lord knew that I was tired of the pain. Finally, I came around to realizing that I loved both of my kids and that God had given them to me for a reason. I felt overwhelmed by all these new responsibilities and dilemmas, but there was something special about Jacob. Wherever we would go, he would attract attention. He smiled all the time, and he was a happy baby. The Lord blessed him indeed with a charm that allured others. His uncle gave him the nickname Happy. I couldn't see why, because I was miserable when I was pregnant. While my mother was dying, she was desperately trying to reach out to me. She'd have someone dial my number so she could hear my voice. I felt sad because I couldn't be there in person to hold her hand. I never felt guilty about what I couldn't do because I did what I could. I continued to pray and ask God to comfort her mind with peace. In May of 1994, I arranged a trip to visit her for Mother's Day. During the visit, I talked about the Lord and asked her if she believed in God. She replied that she did. I asked her if she wanted to hold my baby, but she declined. I felt it was because she did not want to create a bond, knowing she wouldn't see him grow up. I do recall a particular moment while sitting next to her. She leaned over and whispered into my ear. The fumes that came from her insides indicated that she didn't have much longer to live. In life, some aromas are unforgettable, but this one haunted my soul. While we were bonding, Aunt Honey decided to go for a walk, but she turned around, and as she walked towards the door, my mother had a disturbing look on her face that caused Aunt Honey to stay in the room to eavesdrop. At that moment, my mother couldn't muster up the wind to repeat her words. I could only hear broken whispers. She was trying to tell me her last wishes. She nodded her head to be polite. Saul couldn't handle seeing her that way, so he said that he would take a smoke. My mother heard the word smoke and went berserk for a cigarette. Aunt Honey told her no, it was the last thing that she needed. But my mother started moaning while her eyes screamed for one. Her spirit became sad when we got ready to say goodbye. She expressed her love for JR by whispering desperately for Aunt Honey to give him some money. Aunt Honey replied that she'd give him some, but we never saw it. A week later, my cousin called to inform me that my mother had asked for me again, but I couldn't break free to fulfill her request. My cousin was there to give her some comfort. I prayed because there was nothing else that I could do. 3 weeks after that, I received a phone call at work from Aunt Honey. I sensed that something was wrong. I could tell by the tone in her voice that it was time. I cried at that moment, informed my job of the news, and I left work. Tears were streaming down my face while I drove home. My mother died on her sister's birthday. I carried a heavy heart around and lay awake at night just thinking. It doesn't matter how close you are to your parents. It hurts when they die. They are a part of you regardless of how good or bad they were. And when they die, a part of you dies too. You are connected in the spirit and through your genes. I've always been told that I laugh like my mother and that I favor her. Sometimes I can see it, which frightens me, because I never wanted to be anything like her. We immediately planned for the funeral. I was anxiously contemplating that I would see more family I hadn't seen since I was a little girl. Aunt Honey stepped in to take care of the funeral arrangements. When I viewed my mother's body, I couldn't believe my eyes. She looked beautiful. While she was alive, she had endured a hard and violent life. As she got older, it has shown on her face. I have no pictures of my mother to remind me of her sad life because I decided to hold her last look as my best memory. Rocky was there, but Lionel was unable to attend because we couldn't afford his bail. I know that he had to feel terrible to have missed his mother's funeral, but there wasn't much we could do at that point. Lionel was my mother's heart. She had spoiled him and loved him very much. She was fighting for his freedom until the day of her tragedy. And even at that point, she would pawn her jewelry and other items to do whatever she needed to put money on his books. My mother's death meant a lot to Lionel. I believe that she was the only soul in this world that truly loved him. She was his source of hope besides God. My Uncle Steve commented at the repast, "At least we don't have to worry about where Bunny's at." I knew what he meant by it. I didn't take any offense at all. While growing up, she had a rebellious spirit and was very hard-headed. I only knew my mother's side of the family up to age 6. We'd go visiting our aunts and uncles to celebrate the holidays, and my mother would start drinking and get into a fight. I don't know if it was due to her temperament and mental illness or the alcohol. My mother had never wanted her side of the family to raise us. I believe that she had her reasons, and they were probably valid ones. I felt that her family was observing my behavior to see if I had her spirit. I am not perfect, that I understand, but due to God's mercy over my life, I was blessed. In conclusion, they noted on her obituary, Bunny was a lover of life. Rocky behaved at the funeral. I made sure that I wasn't left alone with him because he talks a lot of foolishness. It's only a matter of time before he starts clowning. Give him one drink and it's on. Unfortunately, he was the one who inherited both our parents' temperament and alcoholic genes. Less than 2 months later, I received a phone call from Rocky. He asked me to buy our mother's headstone. I could tell that he had been drinking because he wasn't listening to what I had to say. I tried to talk sensibly at first until I saw where he was coming from, so I hung up the phone. I grieved in silence as I persevered to balance my new responsibilities. I started my exercise regimen again. I was not happy about my weight after the baby because I had gained 75 pounds. I stayed focused on managing my responsibilities and making time for my workouts in the evenings. I was well on my way to dropping the pounds. One evening, I heard a knock at the door while I was working out. It was a woman that lived in my apartment complex. Her son and JR were playmates at school. She wanted to introduce herself to make sure that her son was welcome in my home. I stopped the video to catch my breath while I talked to her. She seemed pleasant and concerned like most parents, and I assured her that it was okay if her son came over to visit. When I went back to work after maternity leave, the company had hired a new staff of managers. That is when things started going downhill. Management enforced a new set of rules which affected the morale in the work environment. There were only 2 African American women that worked there, as well as 2 men. One of the women, Jasmine, shared her news about her promotion, and I was happy to hear that one of us had been promoted for a change. When I was on leave, she brought me a printout of all the job openings. I saw a position that I felt qualified for, and I applied. My reviews were in good standing, and I had always received good reports from the clients and visitors. I thought that the timing worked out well. A few years back, I had met Jasmine when she walked in to request an employment application. The company allowed me the right to use discretion when giving out the applications to the applicants. First, I was delighted to see another African American person because there were not that many where I lived and worked. I politely took the application and told her the usual script. We'll keep your application on file should something become available within 90 days. We'll be glad to give you a call. I looked over her information and checked for a phone number. After she left, I wrote down her phone number and turned in the application. I kept her number for future purposes in case something came up. 6 months later, a general office clerk position became available, and I thought about Jasmine. I immediately called her to ask if she was still searching for a job. She said yes, and we had a brief conversation. I tried to explain my role in all of this, but I could not go into detail. I felt that the Lord had put it on my heart to call her, and I obeyed. We both prayed and got our stories together on how we knew each other from church. We agreed. It was the best way to explain our acquaintance. I asked if she believed in God, and she said yes. Then we shared our beliefs about Jesus Christ. I said, "You're no stranger after all." She did not get the position, but because the Lord was working things out, another position was created for her. There were times when Jasmine had car trouble, and I'd let her use mine. She had to perform her job duties in two buildings that were about a fourth of a mile apart. At first, it was a little lonely, working there and being the only African American woman, but I got used to it. I was surprised that I didn't get the interview. My application was denied. I felt disappointed that HR did not have the decency to inform me at that point. I realized that I was only a token that sat at the front desk. I requested to know the reason why my application had been denied. HR expressed that I didn't have any MS office experience, so I started seeking opportunities to take classes to gain the right to dispute any future opportunities if this incident should ever occur again. Eventually, I received basic training in MS Office. I noticed that I received a low score on my review in the past because I hadn't had the PC training that I should have completed. Therefore, I was penalized for it, and I had an ancient computer that started up through DOS. Desperate to find solutions to the madness, I finally woke up. I realized that the years were rolling by and I wasn't advancing in the direction of being a valuable asset in the job market. On top of that understanding, I was facing the fact that the company started hiring all these Caucasian girls fresh out of college to be administrative assistants. They were purposely overlooking me. Their initiative was to have all the administrative assistants rotate to relieve me for my breaks and lunch. When it came time to relieve me, they would either come late or start complaining. I started documenting their unprofessional behavior. My new bosses were talking down to me and being nasty as well. Whenever I called in sick, they would dispute paying for my sick time. Things got very stressful, and I started taking these issues home. I typed memos to the boss explaining the problems I was having. We would have department meetings, and I would bring up the facts and elaborate on how the other receptionists didn't have to comply with the same rules. I was angry and frustrated, but I figured that I should take it higher after I got enough paperwork on the situation. Saul got tired of me talking about this job because it was giving me the blues. He felt that I should quit and find another job. I wanted to, but something inside me would not allow me to walk away. I was tired of the games and the politics. I felt like they were punishing me for having a baby. I submitted a letter to the company's senior VP expressing my concerns and issues and asking her to intervene, but she wouldn't get involved and pushed it back on management. She would, however, politely speak to me and greet me as though I was appreciated. There was an injustice happening, and I felt compelled to act. I decided to take it a bit further to the EEOC. My whole point was to prove that the company was enforcing certain rules with their African American receptionists that didn't apply to their Caucasian receptionists. I was being denied my washroom breaks, and the company condoned such behavior. During my review, my boss presented a timer to clock my 15-minute breaks. I signed the review despite knowing that things were not right. It was a trap to set me up to fail, and of course, it set the tone for racial discrimination. Times like these had caused me never to forget the struggle that took place 200 years ago when African Americans were emancipated. The EEOC accepted my complaint and expressed that they would be contacting my employer within 90 days. Meanwhile, I continued to take the abuse, but I kept praying to God for relief and equality. I wanted to contact the OTV show Opinion to Voice, or NAR Need a Resolution, to expose them. Still, I didn't have the courage because I figured my story was too small. However, I did contact an African American who had written and published a book on discrimination. His manual helped assist me in not accepting being mistreated. As the days went by, I began to prepare mentally to handle the next step. The best defense supporting my case was my documents and Jasmine. I wanted to quit so many times before I went to the EEOC, but I kept searching for a resolution. The day finally came when management received the letter stating the charge. I was called into a little conference room where I sat at the table with all three devils, causing my grief. Their faces were red while they each took a turn to speak. Then I began to express that I wasn't being treated fairly. Immediately, they yelled and screamed at me to drop the charges, and they repeated it, drop the charges. They wanted to intimidate me, but I refused to open my mouth at that point. It was close to 5 o'clock. I got up and walked out of the room, terrified as I held back tears. While I was logging off my computer and reaching for my things, I felt rage. I was trembling and shaking all the way home. My nerves were so bad that I started calling on the name of Jesus. When I got inside the house, I was crying while telling Saul about my day. That was when I reached my decision to resign. I returned to work the next day to give my letter a resignation. Management knew I was not playing. I concluded that I couldn't work in an environment that was causing me this kind of stress. During the last 2 weeks, no one complained, and the atmosphere was pleasant. The senior VP arranged a meeting with me, and I explained to her that I would not tolerate being mistreated and denied a fair opportunity to advance. She didn't consider any of my concerns, and her motive was to coerce me to drop the charges, but I wasn't about to relent. It had been entrapment from the time I returned to work from maternity leave. For the remainder of time, I was treated with respect as though nothing had ever happened. The kicker to the story was management offered to take me out to lunch. I was frightened to accept after the outburst attack, but I agreed to go. I went in the name of Jesus while I sat in the presence of my enemies, wondering if there was an underlying motive. The conversation was about boring stuff in the news, and they asked me about my new baby. I can honestly say that working there in the last 2 weeks was the best 2 weeks since my first 2 years. In writing this story and looking back over my life, I think of the scripture in the Bible that says God will make your enemies your footstool. Never in my wildest dreams would I have ever imagined sitting at the table in the presence of my enemies as the outcome. God's words are solid as a rock. While being consumed with the fight for justice, I had no idea about what I would do for income. I had to trust God at that point. I applied for unemployment and was assigned an adjudicator to investigate my reason for leaving my employer. I provided copies of my evidence to support my reasoning for quitting. The fact that I had tried to resolve the matter, but due to working under duress, had been unable to. Once again, God answered my prayers. I was approved for my benefits.